Hello, people. I see that fuzziness is still there, but anyway. This is going to be the introduction to the Gospel of Mark Bible study I am starting. This is the first, introduction, so it's the first one. I will be reading from my notes until I get more comfortable doing it this method. So hopefully won't get interrupted by anyone coming home. I'm trying to do this when there's somebody here. So we will be doing the Gospel of Mark, mainly because it's a shorter Gospel. Let's hope this method will work a little better than the last one. I'll be able to add hopefully more in this one than the other one. Or at least, the other one I kind of skipped a lot of stuff when I did it the other way. Because I only had a certain amount of time. And this is, I definitely got to get a haircut. Alright, and my introductory notes. Gospel of Mark Bible Study. I'm going to read it. I'll try to interject some other thoughts while I'm doing it. But this part will be mostly reading from it. So, I should know what that fogginess on the window thing is on the screen. Oh well, maybe I just need to clean the silly screen. Anyway, introduction. Mark portrays Jesus in his gospel story is that Jesus was a servant and the Redeemer of mankind. Mark shows, as it is written for the Gentiles in the church, how the Son of God achieved the victory through his death and resurrection. The turning point of the Gospel of Mark is chapter 8 at the Apostle Peter's confession. You are the Christ. After this statement by Peter to Jesus' question, who do you say that I am? Jesus begins to fortify his men for his coming arrest, trial, suffering, death, and finally his resurrection from the dead. One of Mark's major objectives is to portray Jesus as God's Son. Sorry, can't read my own writing sometimes. At decisive points in his portrayal, he shows the mystery of the person of Jesus. The baptism, Mark 1:11. The transfiguration, Mark 9:7. The Father in heaven calling Jesus my beloved Son, Mark 1:11. Demons recognizing who Jesus was, Mark 1:24, 3:11, and 5:7. However, Jesus is powerful according to the model of the suffering servant of the book of Isaiah, chapter 53. And I will read that, but not in this introduction. This is just an introduction of it's introduction. You get the idea. But I am going to go back probably. Well, in the next session and lesson, I will read the entire chapter of Isaiah 53. But for right now, I just want to do a brief little introduction remarks. He must be obedient to the will of the Father, even to the death on the cross. He is human, for he appears sorrowful, Isaiah 14:34, disappointed, Isaiah 8:2, displeased, Isaiah 10:14, angry, Isaiah 11:15-17, amazed, Isaiah 6:6, and fatigued, Isaiah 4:38. For Mark, faith and discipleship have no meaning apart from the following the suffering Son of God. Faith is not a magic word independent of the believer's participation. Mark 6:1-6. Rather, it draws the believer into intimate union with Jesus as Lord. Mark 9:14-29. As the Son of God serving in self-denial, so too must the disciple serve. Mark 10:42-45. Discipleship with Christ leads to the self-denial and suffering. This, however, is not a matter of religious desire to suffer. Rather, when one loves his life, I'm finding something, people. Rather than when one loses his life, he finds it in Christ. Mark 8:35. My handwriting is atrocious, people, which is why I type things. But I don't type things in my notebook, so I must apologize for my inability to read my own handwriting. The overview is that Mark's chapters 1-10 shows Jesus as the servant of God doing God's will. Chapters 11-16 is Jesus' last week of his ministry and ending with his sacrifice and resurrection. Okay, let's see. Okay, that took less than about 5 minutes. The introduction is not going to be very long. once I get into the actual verses and the actual Bible, it'll be longer. But this is just an introduction. Life of John Mark. Just a few basic things. Life of John Mark. He had a Jewish mother and a Roman father. Mark's home was originally in North Africa, Cyrenia. Then he met his mother. His mother moved to Jerusalem after his father's death. He was the cousin of Barnabas. He would eventually travel to Cyprus with Barnabas, which was Barnabas' hometown, and Barnabas would be killed in 58 AD by a mob. He and his mother were converted by the preaching of Simon Peter. Went on the first missionary journey with the apostle Paul and Barnabas, but returned to Jerusalem halfway through the first trip. Some people say it was because of, malaria or bandits, and some imply that John Mark didn't really fully yet agree with salvation by grace and grace alone. There's no reason why. They don't give one. He just turned around and said, no, I don't want to go any further, and headed back to Jerusalem. Traveled with the apostle Peter. I believe, if I remember correctly, he might have been with Peter in Corinth. He certainly wasn't Peter with Babylon, which, by the way, this is Babylon, not Rome. It means Babylon, the one where Iraq is right now. Because it still was there. Babylon still had a Jewish community. So that's where the First Peter was written. And that's what it means. I'm writing this letter from Babylon. Mark is with me. So, travel with Simon Peter. Wrote the Gospel of Mark at the request of Simon Peter in 68 AD. Probably a little bit before his arrest and trial and execution by being crucified upside down. Peter, not Mark. After the death of Peter and Paul in Rome, where he was with them when he eventually traveled probably around the Mediterranean and then ended up in Alexandria, Egypt, where he started a church. I'm trying to think. I didn't write it down, but I should have. On his second trip to Alexandria, he was killed by an angry mob in 68 AD. So apparently according to the notes I saw, he wrote the gospel and he was killed in the same year, which is, that's what my notes say. That's what the book I'm using said. So they're not really sure about the timeline sometimes, but he was probably killed a year or so after he wrote the Gospel of Mark. He wrote his gospel, but I'm going by what the book says, and the book is, I should have brought it there. The book I use for the the biography of the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Mark is that book. An excellent book, worth reading. Get this copy because this copy has the biography of John the Baptist in it. The new version doesn't have John the Baptist in it. I don't know why he's not in the new copy and new version, but he isn't in the new edition. But get this edition if you can. It's excellent. It works. It tells a lot more than I'm saying. And I might go back over the biography of him again and maybe clarify a few things when I do some more research. But he was killed in Alexandria. He was dragged to death. Actually, it took him 2 days. He dragged him one day and then locked him up and dragged him the rest of it the other day. And he basically died of being torn to pieces by being dragged probably behind horses with a rope around his neck. He founded the Church of Alexandria. That's a brief introduction to this, to the Gospel of Mark, why he wrote it. He wrote it to Gentiles. Peter said, yes, this is my recollections. This is what it's supposed to be. Basically, the Gospel of Mark is supposed to be Peter's recollections, which is where he was with Peter, so why not? It makes sense. He wrote it for Gentiles, mostly. Talks about Jesus as a suffering servant, as I've already said. I will probably read Isaiah 53, probably the next lesson. Mark portrays Jesus as in his gospel as a servant and the redeemer of mankind. It's written with a Roman mind, though, because it's really fast-paced. The Romans wouldn't have understood prophecy, but they would have understood someone doing something constantly. Mark's gospel is written by someone who's always in action, always doing something. That would be a Roman brain. That's how Romans thought. They weren't philosophically or religiously minded like the Greeks or the Jews. The Gospel of Matthew is written for the Jews. The Gospel of Luke is written more for the Greek audience, and the Gospel of John is written basically for the entire church, except he wrote it the fighting against the Gnostics. And they might as well be agnostics because their Jesus is so spiritual to the point he doesn't exist as anything other than a spirit being. But that's neither here nor there. The turning point in the Gospel of Mark is when Jesus asked Peter, who do you say I am? After he asks, who do the people say I am? And they say, well, you're the Messiah, or you're one of the prophets, or you're anything. They rambled out names. And that's what Jesus turned around and looked at Peter and asked him, who do you say I am? Well, he said, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah, you are the Son of God. If you know the story, he tries to tell his disciples, this is what's going to happen now. This is what's coming. My death and my trial, my death, my resurrection. And you know the whole story where Peter basically proves who Peter is, and well, you know the story. We'll get to it eventually anyway. So, he portrays Jesus as his son constantly, as God the Son. I know I could have written my notes a little more, but I didn't want to make the introduction too long, and it's already 12 minutes. I want to try to keep these kind of short. Well, the introduction is going to be short. Where did I put it? Oh, where is it? Anyway, but that's the introduction. We are going to the next thing we'll discuss is the baptism, and that might actually not take as long. That might take about 15 minutes. But the next thing we'll be talking about is the first chapter 1. Let's see, give you an idea. This Bible's been used. Next week, if I am on time on Sunday, it'll be the Mark 1 to probably 14. Probably 1 to 14. Yes, probably 1 to 14. Maybe 13. Because 13 is where he's in the wilderness. So probably next one will be Mark. I keep saying John, Mark, or Mark. That's his name. That's why. Every time you think of John, you're thinking of the Gospel of John. That's the Apostle John. I'm probably going to try to incorporate a few of the things I just got done saying in my notebooks. As I said, this is just an introduction. It's just an introduction. And hopefully once I actually get into it, it'll be a lot better, more organized. Because when I first did this Bible study, I was a mess because I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know how I wanted to teach it. And as I kept going in the Bible study, it became more and more coherent. Actually, it was almost in the middle of it when I finally figured out how I wanted the format to be. But I don't think it's going to take that long. Because I'm just going to use the format I had in the very last one and start using that one. But I'm just trying to prolong until 15 minutes. I figure if I'm at 15, I might as well do it at 15. But this book, as I said before, is very good. Has all the apostles, has even Peter, Paul in here. See, it has Paul, it has John Mark, Barnabas, John the Baptist, Luke, Lazarus, Paul. I wish they had Timothy and maybe a few other people in here, but they don't. Like Mary Magdalene would be nice. But it's a good book, excellent book on research if you want to learn more about John Mark and all that fun stuff and the history of what happened and his gospel. And I mean, I like the book. I used this book when I wrote my play. When I was writing my biblically based plays, I used this book constantly. But get this version, not the other version, because this version has, well, this version is older and it has John the Baptist in it. The other version, for reasons I don't understand, they don't have John the Baptist in it. But anyway, that's it for this Bible study, for the introduction to John Mark. Hopefully I'm not too boring, and hopefully I'm not too rambling. I will see you next Sunday for well, technically it's part 1, but we'll call it part 2 just for the sheer thrill of it. Behave yourselves, people. Read your Bibles. Study. There might be a test, and there probably will be a test.